All right, good afternoon. It is 1 o'clock on the dot, so we will go ahead and get started. Hello, and welcome to Orr Group's webinar on Culture of Philanthropy. My name is Shabby Rosales, and I am the VP of HR here at Orr Group. I have headed up our internal HR team for the last 4 years, as well as the outsourced HR and recruiting services that we provide as well. So we've gathered today to talk about something that is fundamental, I think, to every nonprofit organization, and that is culture. Now, Orr Group we're traditionally a fundraising shop, but a lot of the work that we do actually is surrounding culture and culture building. We even have a whole service line just dedicated just to assessing and examining this exact thing. But what we want to talk about today is not just run-of-the-mill cultural issues, but specifically a culture of philanthropy. What it means, the importance of it amid the current climate, and some tips and tricks when we're looking ahead into the future. I am joined by 3 amazing colleagues, all members of the senior leadership team. First and foremost is the man that needs no introduction, though I will do my best to do him some justice here. Cj Orr is our CEO and managing partner. He and his wife Carol founded Orr Group nearly 30 years ago after a thriving career on Wall Street with Goldman Sachs. Now, he has seen his fair share of crises over the years and has built what I think is probably one of the best cultures at Orr Group. I think probably built on some of the tenets that he's learned along the way. So his insight here will be really important. Next up is his son and our Vice President Cj Orr. And you'll see the similarities between them in how they talk and what they look like and all of that. Outlook might be a little bit different, so that'll be interesting to see. Before officially coming on board 7 years ago, I can't believe it's been that long, CJ has had a flourishing career in finance, doing some trading with AllianceBernstein, and he's also at Oppenheimer as well. Internally at Orr Group, he manages our business development efforts, our operations shop, and he sits on our executive committee. Externally, with clients, he serves in a number of roles on the front line and also helps drive strategic initiatives as well. Lastly, but certainly not least, is our Senior Director, Becca Bennett. She joined the team in DC nearly 2 years ago, following a decade in the field as the Director of Development at a number of different nonprofits, Hope for Henry, Make-A-Wish Mid-Atlantic, earlier at Cystic Fibrosis. She is a powerhouse in all things, and if you've had the pleasure of working with her, you'll know what a brilliant thought partner and leader she is in her own right. So very lucky to have her with us as well. Just a quick housekeeping reminder before we get started. We'll try to keep this dialogue sort of open and conversational. So if you have questions, feel free to ask them throughout, and we'll try to answer them through the course of the webinar. So just ask them whenever they come up and direct the questions to the Q&A bar that you see down at the bottom of your screen. If you put them in the comment section, we might not be able to see it. So definitely use that Q&A function, and I will keep an eye on that and we'll answer them throughout. All right, so let's jump right in. Becca, I'll start with you. Can you just lay the groundwork here and sort of tell us what we mean when we say culture of philanthropy? And I'll say culture of philanthropy and COP probably interchangeably throughout the entire thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So your culture of philanthropy, or your COP, as many of us know, is an organization's attitude towards fundraising and development. And a strong culture really directly correlates to a successful development operation. So in organizations with a strong culture of philanthropy, the focus on fundraising stretches across all teams and then also across all staff at all levels. So everyone understands the importance of fundraising, they acknowledge their role in the development process, and they really support this process in whatever capacity they can. And again, that is from your program and marketing department to your leadership team. Everybody should really be committed to your organization's philanthropic goals.
Super, thank you. And I think it goes without saying that this type of work doesn't just materialize out of thin air, right? I mean, it's got to be intentional, it's got to be focused, and I'm sure it has to start somewhere. So Steve, I'll turn over to you. Can you tell us from your perspective, how is a culture of philanthropy typically derived, and who is responsible for implementing or instilling this type of culture in an organization?
Well, first of all, good afternoon. It's lovely to be here. I love this topic because I have seen through my 30 years working with nonprofits that this is probably the key issue that either makes the organization great or causes it to stumble and it's just a constant ongoing challenge. So when you ask, where does it start and how does it move through the organization? It's clearly a leadership led issue. I could use myself as an example. I started a nonprofit called Youth Inc., and the culture there was very strong, in terms of leading. I work with all kinds of nonprofits where either the CEO and the top, folks, the chair of the board, are totally into philanthropy and they're totally engaged with donors, conveying the right messages, being passionate, all the things that are necessary, or not. And I suspect a lot of folks on the call today would say, I'm really laboring under a CEO who doesn't really get it. And it's not always essential that the CEO, is the best fundraiser in the shop. But if the person knows that, that's a huge start, because there are, as Becca said, there are many other folks within the organization that can be very effective and should be involved. Everyone needs to be involved. So I agree with your definition, Becca, that it's everyone's involvement with culture, with the culture of philanthropy that makes it work. A couple of quick examples. I work with a number of hospitals. The best fundraisers in a hospital is the physician. If there's a physician who has a grateful patient and just understands that patient, either they saved their life or, whatever the situation medically would be, or in this environment, dealt with COVID, for example, the gratefulness that comes from that patient is known intimately by the physician. And that is the best person, to start a dialogue around philanthropy. Much a similar situation. We work with all kinds of universities and colleges. It's the professor or the teacher who knew the student, knows the parents sometimes, not always, but that person can be incredibly passionate. So it really is, everyone in the organization that needs to play that role. Obviously, the development department.
Thank you. That's helpful. And I'm sure, and I'll stick with you for just a minute. I'm sure thinking internally with the staff and existing team is obviously one part of the equation, but can you tell us a little bit about what we typically experience as the board's involvement in fostering a culture of philanthropy? What can we expect from them?
Sure. So one of the first questions I always ask when I meet a new nonprofit leader is, well, is the board engaged? And if so, at what level and how passionate, and are they giving? There's a lot of indicators as to whether a board is fully committed and helpful or not in the culture of philanthropy. And, if the organization is structured properly, and if the CEO understands, how to motivate and recruit the right folks to that situation, it will make all the difference in the world. And if the board, is a founding board, it needs to transition to the next level, or if it's just a board that has sort of become too big and uninvolved, I suggest addressing that issue, because if the board wears it, owns it, becomes it, i.e. the, spreading the culture, infusing the culture, the passion leader into their networks, the success rates on fundraising will go up dramatically. And I would suggest on programming fronts as well.
Thank you. And just to round out this sort of framing of the conversation, CJ, I'll turn it over to you. Can you just remind us all of why this all matters? What is the so what of why it's important for an organization to have a strong COP or culture of philanthropy?
Yep. Thank you, Shabby, and good afternoon. Thanks for dragging me on this webinar. I shaved for the first time in over a month. This is great. I feel like I'm coming back to reality. Now, a culture of philanthropy is incredibly important for driving revenue, right? So in order for your programs to be funded, you need revenue to do that. And I look at culture of philanthropy as really mathematical. So without a culture of philanthropy, let's just say it's your CEO and your chief development officer that's doing all the fundraising. So that's 2 people in an organization, maybe of 10 people, that hold all the relationships, that hold all the knowledge, and will do all the work in terms of the fundraising. So what if, for example, they're trying to reach a donor and neither of them know that donor? If you open it up to your whole organization to 8 additional people, the likelihood that someone else will know that person or be able to be helpful in connecting you is much higher than if you were to silo it with just those 2 people. So when I think of the culture of philanthropy, I just think about the more you involve, the more transparent you are about your process, your donors, what you're doing to fundraise, the better chances you'll have of getting in front of who you want to get in front of and raising that end dollar. I think that any organization that embraces that transparent model You know, a lot of organizations are very siloed, but the more transparent you can be, and where it's a pool and everyone working together, I think the more successful you'll be in raising revenue.
Thank you. And thank you all. I think that does a really good job of sort of framing what it is that we're talking about here, and probably more importantly, why it matters. So now let's get into the current climate and what we're seeing on the lines day to day. I'd like to start with you here. Can you tell us how what we're dealing with right now is different than business as usual? I think more specifically, like, what are the challenges that frontline teams are facing now that fundraising is almost entirely virtual?
We might need to
repeat. Cutting in. I think you're cutting in a little bit, but I think the question you were asking was, what are some of the challenges that we're seeing people face with now that fundraising is completely virtual? And this is really a time where development team members feel, you know, a mounting pressure, not just to drive their mission, but to sustain the organization. Before this crisis, I think that, you know, development operations were really a high stakes environment because mission sustainability depended on that. But now there's this whole new layer of, you know, making sure that there's, you know, salaries and that you're not, you know, you're really sustaining the organization's success as it relates to keeping your colleagues on board and then driving that activity and mission fulfillment. So it's important to really foster a strong culture where everyone is working together and your development team doesn't really feel that isolation, especially when there are added layers like this virtual workforce and being remote. And that's also especially relevant right now at a time where leadership is being pulled in a lot of different directions, you know, with PPP loan applications, cost containment, budget cuts, you name it. This kind of top-down approach that we've been talking about to enforcing a culture of philanthropy isn't necessarily something that our leadership has time to do. So this all-in team effort is needed now more than ever to make sure that your development team feels supported and like they can get the job done.
Thank you. And I see all the notes of my sound is going in and out, so I apologize. I will try to figure out what is happening on my end. So we're talking about all of this, you know, I think under the assumption that a strong COP exists already, right? So what can you do? And Becca, I'll probably keep with you for just a minute. What can you do if you didn't have a particularly strong culture of philanthropy prior to going remote? And I think more specifically, like, how can teams be brought together effectively in this kind of environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, though I just made the point that leadership is being pulled in a lot of different directions, it's really important to make time to set the vision and the course of the direction, especially in this moment where we are working remotely and virtually. So taking that time to do like an all-team check-in and address how your program has shifted, you know, what you're seeing transpire in this new normal that we're all working in, and what your organization is doing as a result of that is really gonna enforce your development team's ability to go out and fundraise on behalf of the organization. So if you didn't have a particularly strong culture of philanthropy going into this, it's really, really important that you recognize that, be it at your management level or your mid-staff level, and that you take the right steps to practice that virtually today.
Thank you. And we actually have a question from the audience here that I think is probably pertinent. And Becca, I'll stay with you again. This person is asking, how can I manage up to an ED that doesn't naturally instill a culture of philanthropy? And I think that's particularly interesting here, right? Because it ties into what you were just talking about. So what are your thoughts there?
I think it also ties really nicely to something that Steve was saying earlier, and something that CJ mentioned, is that a strong culture, you know, it's driven top down, but it stretches across an organization. So if you are coming into this with an ED who naturally doesn't instill, you know, a culture of philanthropy, be proactive, manage up, come up with a plan and bring it to your supervisor to say, you know, this is what I'm seeing some of our challenges are right now, and this is how we think that we can all work together. And once you get that buy-in, bring in your colleagues and really drive that activity yourself. I think that, you know, we've talked about all of the mounting pressure, not just that the development team faces, but also that leadership is facing. So it's important that we're there for our leaders as well to say, I see that you're busy. this needs to happen. This is how I can make that happen, and then just activate.
Okay. I just have one other small thing. For executive directors who don't buy into having a full culture of philanthropy just yet, take your small wins, write them down, and prove ROI on what you're doing. So if you can relate whatever you're doing back to a culture of philanthropy and say that one of the reasons we got this extra money was because of our cultural philanthropy, having that data will really be influential in steering a CEO to say, okay, I get it. We need to go deeper on this now.
Absolutely. Super. Thank you. And we actually have another question from the audience here that I'll pitch over to Steve because it's asking about boards. It says, how can I work with a board that doesn't typically have involvement in the fundraising process? Oh no, we lost Steve's audio here. That's okay. All right, CJ, we'll pitch it over to you.
I think he's just on mute. But from the get-go and dealing with board members, with new ones, we need to be very clear what the give-get expectations are and what their role on the board will be. What will happen is if you don't, then they're never going to do anything about it. So being upfront with a board member on what your other board members are helping raise, what you expect them to help raise, how you expect them to be making introductions of how much engagement you expect them to have with donors and everything like that. The more upfront you can be about it, the better off you'll be. Because if you don't, then it just won't happen.
I agree. And I think we lost Steve, so we will just go on, I think. I'm not really sure, but hopefully he's able to join us again. All right, let's see. CJ, I want to stick with you for just a minute.
That's never a good idea.
This is undoubtedly, I think, one of the most sort of complex and taxing crises that many of us have experienced, right? I mean, it's like the duration of it, the many unknowns, the sheer sort of magnitude and reach of this virus. It's a lot, and it's a lot more than we probably ever could have anticipated coming into this just a couple weeks ago. So it's understandable, I think, given all of what we know, that these are unprecedented times and the stress and the pressure can just feel insurmountable. What advice do you have for frontline teams to stay motivated amid all the pressures that they're facing?
Yeah, that is probably more prevalent now than it ever will be in any of our lives. So we're confronted with a virus that none of us had anything to do with and are stuck in a situation of incredibly negative, challenging, strenuous times that we've never, ever probably seen before in our lives. And so what happens is you'll just start to experience incredible anxiety, incredible mental health issues, incredible just general mental challenges through this time that you've never experienced before. So the way I think about it is we've been training as fundraisers for this moment our entire lives, because this is going to affect every single mission, and every single fundraiser needs to take what they've learned over the past 10, 20 years, however long you've been in the industry, and apply that to what you're doing right now. So I think us as fundraisers need to be doing what we've been doing best over the past 10 years, even better right now, because every single dollar that we're raising right now is counted and going directly to our programs, which is probably helping the pandemic or make this world a better place in this instance. So that's just the general sense that I'm seeing. And also just I find a lot of organizations to be inspired are going back to mission moments. So, on your staff calls, remembering why we're doing all this and what our mission is and how we're being helpful for the world right now is really important, because sorry, my cell phone's going off. That's going to help us do our jobs better and influence us to want to go out and raise more money. So mission moments all over the place. Also on your board, you should be having mission moments with your board so they know why they're introducing you to XYZ person. Without that context behind it, it's really hard for them to do. So the more you can bring your mission to everyone, your staff, your leadership, and your board, probably the better success you'll have in fundraising in this moment.
Shabby, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. We were concerned, but we're glad you're back.
I think I was Zoom bombed because the computer completely froze. I'm now on my iPad, but sorry about that. I want to add to what CJ said. I think if I heard it correctly, the question, these mission moments and how do you keep it going? There's going to be a lot of staff changes, I think, in the coming months, and that will both be a pressure on the organization to make sure that new folks come up in terms of their knowledge of the mission and so forth. It's also clearly an opportunity, to educate either for the first time or re-educate, hone the message, do a lot of things that rebooting an organization requires. So in all things right now, I think those are the right ways to think about this environment.
Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful for sure. Okay, we've talked a lot about motivating teams and focusing internally with your staff and volunteer leadership. But now let's shift focus and discuss how you should be communicating externally with donors. There is no doubt that everyone has had to pivot in this environment, but what exactly does that pivot look like, I think is the question. So Becca, I'll turn it over to you, someone who's serving on the front line for a number of different organizations that's had to shift gears rather quickly. What kinds of shifts are we seeing in donor outreach?
Yeah, more than ever, we're seeing organizations being really transparent with their funders. So it's not just about the need for the mission fulfillment and why the mission is important, but people are really sharing more than they ever have related to budget constraints and the challenges that they might be facing with volunteer leadership, with board of directors, with your top funders that are currently supporting your mission to really kind of seek not just guidance, but additional support. And then especially as it relates to event fundraisers right now, we're making this really nice shift from our transactional kind of event sponsors and supporters, reaching out to them to say, though this event is canceled and you're not going to be able to go to the dinner and the gala that you were planning, we still need your corporate dollars. We still need your sponsorship for these reasons. And you're bringing, again, what was historically, sometimes a transactional relationship and helping them understand how their giving is transformational, especially in this high stakes, high need environment.
You actually bring up a good point. I want to stick on the events piece for a second, because I think we've seen so many events get canceled, as you said, or pushed back to the fall or next year or whatever, and seeing a lot of event staffers become displaced as a result, right? So I always question, you have to imagine that there's still a place for this specific type of expertise. So CJ, I'll actually turn it over to you. You have a lot of events experience. I think of the three of us on the panel, or four of us on the panel. Having worked on a number of large and small events over the years, how can we best leverage this specific type of expertise and the talent of these event producers, planners, just the people that are in the event space? How can we use their talent in a different way now that we're moving to this sort of broader digital platform?
Yeah, there's two ways to answer that. One is if there's not a need on the events, there's probably going to be need in corporates or foundations or something along those lines where there's more action happening there. And so one thing we're seeing is people are spending time there instead of working on the event. Or it's you're going to go digital and or you're going to try a different format. And actually that was going to require more time to figure out and more time fundraising because it's a completely new beast. And so we're finding that some organizations are going down that line as well and deploying all staff knowledge and just understanding of the event space in this new world that we live in to go towards that new type of event.
Okay, thank you. It's helpful. Now, we have talked a ton about internal and external impact in this environment as it is right now. So looking ahead, as many states begin to open back up and we're seeing some easing of restrictions, I think we'll see some fundamental shifts in how people interact generally. I'm not even in the fundraising space, but just how people interact. But this will have a very direct impact, I think, on culture, specifically on building a culture of philanthropy going forward. So Steve, I'd love your thoughts here on what we can expect to look different as we move into the new normal.
Well, it's obviously unclear what the new normal means. You have to start there. Everybody needs to be safe, and we know that. And so I think people are going to err on the side, of the next several weeks and months, on a lot less travel, maybe no travel in some cases. So really, and I've been talking to a number of folks about this recently, just yesterday, actually, a number of conversations with leaders. we're so accustomed to jumping on an airplane, going and sitting in front of someone and, sharing our passion and hearing what they have to say and so forth. So obviously the techniques that we use are radically different. And the good news is, though, I think that everybody's having to do this. So the interaction that we sort of initially forced ourselves to become accustomed to and be effective at, i.e. on the screen, is something everyone is having to grapple with. So I think we've gotten beyond the technology. I think we've all built some technique around this. And the tactics we're going to have to use in fundraising are simply going to be this. Now, there are a lot of advantages about Zoom and other technical platforms, in that you can put numerous people on, you can do really creative things. The whole digital platform offers, lots of different varieties. So I'm not sure what the world will look like, but I'm quite sure that we have to adapt. And I'm pretty sure from that perspective, it's never going to go backwards.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that for sure. I think it also begs the question of so we know, I think, what the Frontline team is going to have to do, right? We know there's going to have to be some sort of shift there. But I think it also begs the question of what are other departments going to do to support COP across the organization? So Becca, I'll turn that over to you. What do you foresee happening here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that right now, especially, the development department and your program operation are really working in lockstep to communicate, this is what we're doing, this is what we're seeing, and the program team is helping the development departments and kind of frontline fundraisers figure out how are we communicating that. And then the development operation is coming back to say, this is the response that I'm hearing. Either we're not reporting on this heavily enough, or we're not emphasizing this piece of the work. And there's this really nice partnership that we're seeing happen to really kind of gain momentum with current and new funders. So I think that as we look ahead, that's going to be something that is sustained in our long-term development operations across organizations. I think that this is a really strong partnership that should always exist. And in organizations where it did exist before this crisis, we're seeing a lot of success. And in organizations where it's being instilled now in a reaction to this crisis, I think we'll see it carry forward to the future.
Great, thank you. And we actually have another question from the audience that I'd like to bring up here. And Becca, I'll stay with you. It reads, how can you utilize your program team or marketing department to help with cultivation and stewardship? So what are your thoughts there? We also have another question that I think is similar, and it says, volunteers are a major source of our funding. How to introduce COP in volunteer orientation and training? So two sort of similar questions, but using different platforms. So I'll pitch that to you.
I will stay at the front end with programs, and then we can bring in volunteers and then shift to marketing. But I think that with program departments, as you're working through this kind of enhanced communication style, there is going to be an element with funders where you're talking through the reporting metrics that you promised in your existing MOUs to say, we would serve X number of individuals with your dollars. And we're seeing that change now. I mean, we're working virtually. We're not necessarily able to yield the high touch impact that we've had. So we're seeing programs kind of pare back and focus on quality and high impact. So how are you sharing that with your current funders to say, we told you that we were going to be servicing 100 individuals this year. I've talked with my program department. It looks like realistically, we're only going to be able to yield, 50 to 75 outputs because we're working in this virtual setting, and this is why. So using your program team and kind of the information they have to help you steward your donors is one additional area where you can partner together. And then I think when you look to marketing and your kind of marketing department, to the point that CJ made earlier, use them to help with some creative messaging, especially as it relates to mission moments and the stories that you're seeing and kind of the high impact that you're seeing in the field right now. So share those mission moments, share those testimonials, and get those stories out so that people understand not just this is what we say we're going to do, but this is an example of something that we've done and done really well. And then to the last point, I think, which was volunteers, there is always a need for volunteers. And I think that organizations are struggling right now where volunteers might previously been used to help kind of drive the program operation forward and be in the field with that mission activity. you know, right now you have a lot of volunteers that are saying, I want to help. I don't know how. I think now is the time to really be on the phones, reaching out, like I said, to your current partners to say, this is how we're shifting, and this is why we need support. And then also all of your volunteers are the closest to your mission. They know exactly what you do and why it matters. And they can be going out to their own networks, seeking support financially for your organization, and then also kind of driving and building that volunteer army for when we do come out on the other end of this.
Thank you. Something that we hadn't touched on, but I think may be of interest here, is thinking about groups that have recently experienced an influx of donors. And this may be because they have a relief fund going, or their mission or programmatics are particularly relevant right now. But the big question here, I think, as it relates to culture of philanthropy, is what are the strategies that fundraisers should consider right now to retain these donors going forward? CJ, I'd probably pitch that one over to you.
Well, on the organizations that are seeing an influx of donors, you know, your food banks, your hospitals, or everyone else is on the front lines. You definitely should take all of those names, those new names, build out your list, do your research, figure out who you want to put on your major gift portfolio, and then start to build and cultivate a relationship, because you just were blessed with many new donors that you haven't been able to cultivate before, and now you have that opportunity. So definitely jump on that. For most of the organizations and the nonprofits that are kind of in the middle of the line, you know, the strategy right now is to communicate, just as we're doing here on this webinar, and just as you should be doing with your donors for when this does calm down and you can start asking again. Actually, we're seeing a lot of asks starting to happen already. We're seeing that people are feeling more comfortable about it. And, you know, I was on the phone with someone the other day, they're like, do I ask someone on Zoom? It's like, do you have a better choice? Yeah, gotta ask on Zoom. You know, you can't go get a coffee anymore. So what else are you gonna do? We feel as though the strategy is communicate, and then when you feel appropriate, then start to do your ask. And we're feeling as though we're starting to get to that ask point.
Thank you. There's actually a question here from the audience that I want to pull on. Any thoughts on how boards are reacting and viewing the pandemic and its impact on organizations aside from the obvious? Steve, I think I'd pitch this one to you actually. There's a sub question to this, or a sub bullet. Is there any indication on how boards will better grow and develop to better fulfill their responsibilities? And that sort of goes to their role in culture of philanthropy, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it sort of wraps all these topics we're talking about right now together.
Yeah.
Your most valuable, well, sometimes your most valuable volunteer would be a board member. It's someone who has come through the ranks of, I have something in my family that relates to this. I have something personally that makes me passionate about this. And thus, you know, a volunteer in theory should be your most important advocate and your most important stewardship assistant type person. The pandemic, did it change things? I believe where it's changed things with volunteers / board members is that it's caused leaders, CEOs, CDOs, others to say, you know, we have been suffering under this board of, you know, disengaged people who've just been here too long, or whatever the situation might be, and we need to do something about it. We have identified a new group of people, perhaps to CJ's point, you know, who are really motivated to give us because it was COVID issue, or it wasn't COVID at all. It was people just feel more passionate, and they've proven that this is something they're passionate about. Let's go and elevate some of those people to board. Let's refresh the board. Let's use this as a, it was one of our colleagues who said, don't ever let a crisis, what's the word? Not take advantage of a crisis, something along those lines. That's exactly what I think boards, those who manage boards, are thinking about. That was rather crude, but sorry. You get the point.
It was never let a crisis go to waste.
There you go. Those were the words I was looking for.
Also still crude, but
it's true. Oh my gosh. Okay, there's another question here specifically on volunteers. So Becca, maybe I'll pitch it back to you. As a volunteer, how can a volunteer share ideas with the development team? So this new normal is a time for learning. How can we get others on board? What are your thoughts on that?
You know, I think that if you do or you don't have a relationship with, you know, the members of your development team, this is a moment of heightened communication. I think that that's the running theme across kind of everything that we're all saying. And this is also a time where your development professionals are looking for support, even if it's an idea that can't be implemented for whatever reason. Just being able to have a thought partner on the phone and hear somebody that wants to support you can go a long way. And kind of like the social awareness piece and kind of the mental health piece, being able to have somebody that you can rely on is really impactful. So I would just say, reach out to your development department and talk through it. It might be something that they're already thinking through. It might be a new idea, but there's no such thing really as a bad idea. So I would just make the call.
Shabby, can I add something?
And it looks like,
CJ, you and I were on the phone yesterday with someone we had just met for the first time, and he was explaining how he is using this opportunity. He's the chief development officer for a very large charity. He's saying, you know, in the absence of a lot of direct fundraising, at least in the last 5 weeks or so, he's been taking advantage of the virtualness and Zoom and other technological platforms to arrange cultivation events on Zoom. And what is he doing? He is simply saying, this is a moment when people are willing to listen a bit more. This is what, you know, others of you said on this call, and it's absolutely true. CJ, you talked about this is a time to communicate. Well, what a great time to, you know, grab those volunteers who you know are interested, engage them in what you're currently struggling with, and how you're going to emerge, and where you're going to take the organization from there, and let them participate and share views. That is the way you build consensus. It's sort of an abbreviated strategic planning process, if you will, because you're not, in this perspective, you're not seeking to change the mission of the organization. You're seeking to get input and build consensus to where people will feel all the more passionate to either give you money, help you raise money, or otherwise expand networks.
Yeah, and Steve, to further that point, someone also put a Q&A about individual giving or grassroots giving during this time. The results just came out from the Giving Tuesday, or the May giving. Well, it wasn't as much as Giving Tuesday usually is, but one of the findings was that the actual amount of donations was higher than it usually was. So it was usually an average around $25. This time around it's $85. So that, you know, kind of brings you to, or starts to beg the question, should I be starting to go to my individual donors, my grassroots donors? I think if you have that donor base, like a lot of organizations are very much, you know, up here with major donors and board only, but if you have a large individual giving database, I think now is a good time to put your digital fundraising to use. Everybody is sitting here at home looking at Zoom all day, and any digital fundraising you could do during this time will probably be very beneficial.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's good. There's also a question in here. Can one of you speak to planned giving in this COVID time? Steve, I'll pitch that one over to you.
Steve, did you write that question in there?
Yeah.
Steve is planting questions.
My colleagues know that I'm gaga over planned giving. Always have been, but the answer is right now, people are really worried. I mean, I work with a number of estate folks, you know, whether they're attorneys or advisors or whomever, and they're saying, you know, people in a moment like this really get concerned about not only their own lives, but the lives of their children and what will happen to my children if I'm not around, or in any direction you want to look. But, you know, estate planning comes into play. Have I built the proper will? I want to stay out of probate when I pass away or when my parents pass away? And, you know, how am I going to maximize that? Well, it turns out, you know, that charity is one of the most effective ways of not paying estate taxes or otherwise, you know, doing the right thing and being charitable. So people are really attentive to this right now more than ever. The other major point I would make on planned giving right at this moment, which happened post 9/11, it happened post, you know, 2008-9, is that people are more reticent to give cash. I'm thinking more like campaign gifts right now, or you know, slightly larger gifts and multiple year commitments. They're a little less comfortable given what's gone on, you know, in the markets and continue to go on, you know, in making these big cash commitments. But they know they have the wealth. They know it's in their estate. So, making a bequest, creating something fairly creative, like a charitable remainder trust, or something really similar, simple, like, creating a donor advised fund, that's something they're going to be receptive to. So I think we really owe it to our organizations to talk about and be very familiar with and talk about planned giving. And if you're not, I'd be happy to share everything I know with you.
There you go. There's also a question here about the stewardship of private grant makers. Becca, you've had a number of experiences with this recently, so I'd probably pitch it over to you. What are some strategies or things that people should be thinking about right now as it relates to that?
Yeah, I think, communicating with them in the same way that you would during a regular grant cycle is first and foremost. And then two, like I said previously, making sure that they understand how some of your outputs might have changed and where the organization is shifting. There are a lot of private grant makers that are shifting the way that they'll be taking reporting deadlines. They're either extending that reporting deadline or eliminating some of the outputs that are due. But then they're also adding additional COVID-19 relief funding. So reaching out to your current partners to see, what additional opportunities might exist for your organization is first and foremost. And then for those private grant makers that you've secured in response to COVID-19, really making sure that they're understanding, what you were doing was really important before this crisis. They're funding you in response to COVID-19, but there's an opportunity to sustain that relationship and keep those dollars for the coming years as well. So I think, like we keep saying, the common thread is communication and stewardship, and I think just staying on top of that is important.
Thank you. There is a question here about, it's not necessarily COVID related, but I think it's a good one actually. It's about founder syndrome.
Great.
Yeah, so I will ask CJ maybe to tell us what that is exactly for anyone that doesn't know. And the question here is asking, employees want to be able to grow within an organization, but it's hard to remain optimistic when you're dealing with founder syndrome, which is a lot of micromanaging and things like that. So can you tell us a little bit about what it is and maybe what are some ways to get around it?
How about working with your father syndrome? Is that one of them? I can tell you all about it. We can go on for hours.
You lucky young man, you.
That's a different webinar.
Well,
that could be next week's
series.
Our session to that one.
Steve, you're going to talk about actual founder syndrome because you actually went through it with YouThink. But what we're talking about here is when your founder has been around for a very long time, a lot of the donor relationships are with that founder, and that founder has got to retire at some point or wants to, pass the reins on to someone. How do you do it? How do you do it effectively? But also, how do you instill the culture of philanthropy after that founder leaves, or how do you continue it if that founder is there, but they're going to leave? So Steve, that's squarely in your court.
Well, and you say that because I founded an organization in New York called YouThink. On an outsourced basis, I ran it as the CEO for 20 years. And I woke up one day and I said, I got to get out of here and pass this on to the next person. So I actually led the search committee, found the right person, and that person is there now, and she's fantastic. And I'm really close with her, and I'm the chair of the National Advisory Board. I'm really proud to say that, and I try to help her as much as I can now, just as a volunteer. So that's maybe a positive thing. But I have to say, while handing it over, it was really challenging because every founder, I'm coming at it from the founder's position, has created something hopefully successful. And then, the new person comes in and wants to put their own mark on it and so forth. So that's the kind of stress that you're experiencing, I'm sure, in that question. So how do you deal with it? There's a variety of answers. I can't answer them all here, but it really comes down to the cooperativeness of the two people involved in particular. The person who's handing it over has to recognize, guess what? I'm not in charge anymore. It's not my thing. I can have some influence maybe, but I need to get out of the way. And then the new person coming in should be somewhat sensitive to that, but understand also and have a clear mandate from the board. That's really important. To be in charge, to take over, to shape the organization as he or she sees fit. And then for the staff, it's a tough situation. I get it. I've seen it up close and personal in many situations. So, rolling with the punches. New people like to bring in, new leaders like to bring in their own staff. So that's an issue always. But try to get along and be productive and help the new leader and transition the culture, to being even better than it was would be a great way to do it.
Thank you. That was great. Steve, I'll stick with you just for another moment. Sort of goes hand in hand with what you were just talking about. What's the best way to tactfully move off board members who do not have a culture of philanthropy?
Oh, I love helping organizations do that because I've done it so much myself, not just with You Think, but I've been the CEO of 5 organizations, so I understand. It's absolutely paramount that this be done, first of all. And so it goes with the other question of, is this the right time to think about that? Is the board thinking about that? Believe me, the board always thinks about it. The ones who are really engaged on the board and who are the biggest givers and, or the most active in terms of the program are looking at their colleagues and saying, you're not doing you're not committed to this organization. You're not even coming to meetings and such and so. So it is really paramount that we make this transition always happen. It's not a one moment in time thing either. It's an ongoing kind of transitional thinking. So how do you ease somebody off? I'll tell you how I do it. I meet with board members. If I'm the CEO, I meet with board members once a year minimum, one-on-one. And I go through in sort of a report card-ish fashion saying, here's what we did last year. And by the way, it wasn't much. So this is what we want to think about this year. There's a give and get. How are we going to do that? How are we going to work together to accomplish that goal? There's program goals, there's committees that you're involved with, whatever it is. And we set goals and we move through it. And then sort of quarter by quarter, I touch base with those board members and said, how are we doing? I haven't seen too much activity. And if it gets worse, it becomes very clear to the board member that this isn't working. And then it's really kind of an easy conversation. This really isn't working. Let's, do you mind if we move on? Or if this is the value of term limits, that it comes to a moment where the term is over and, we're not talking about re-upping you, we're talking about replacing you. So lots of really good tactics in there that really must be employed.
Yep, that's really helpful. Thank you. There's a question in here about sort of big data and CRMs. And CJ, I'll pitch this one over to you because you were talking about ROI earlier and how the use of that is really powerful. I think it's especially powerful in a culture of philanthropy. So can you speak to sort of how you align or utilize data in sort of driving or developing a culture of philanthropy?
Yeah. So data doesn't lie. And you have to set up your organization so you're tracking your key KPIs, your key performance indicators. So whether that be your revenue, amount of meetings set up, or amount of emails sent for digital, might be posts, social media posts, etc., amount of users to your website, tracking that data and reporting up to, in this case, you're proving the value of cultural philanthropy, that all arrows are pointing up. That will be helpful in your conversations with leadership. Also, we found that many organizations, CEOs want data to inform business decisions. And the more data that you can give them through your CRM, through your big data, through your social media, through all of your SEO, everything like that, to inform your decisions, the more you can do that for the CEO, the better off you'll be as an organization. It's just incredibly helpful when trying to make some really pertinent decisions. And if you have the data to back it up, it makes it a lot easier.
Thank you. That's great. There's a question here about, what do you do when there's a misalignment between staff culture and leadership culture? And I'll actually take this one. I think that something we've talked a lot about here is, culture starts from the top, it's top down, all of that. But I think we also have to understand it's the lifeblood of the organization. It's not something that you can just, say one day is going to happen. This is going to be our culture. These are our tenants. Go with that. It doesn't work that way. You have to look at the lay leaders around you. You have to look at how people are interacting. You have to look at what's actually happening with the staff, with your teams. Control what you can control in those environments. When there's a misalignment, the best thing you can do, and you've heard us say it here all day, is communicate. The best thing you can do when you are misaligned with someone else in any capacity, this is life advice and work advice and culture of philanthropy advice generally. If you're misaligned, open the lines of communication and ask what's going on. Either I'm not understanding, or we're having a misunderstanding, or we see things differently. And sometimes that's okay. It's okay to agree to disagree and walk away understanding each other and understanding where you both stand. So I would definitely look to lay leaders across the organization for what the actual culture of the org is. And then if there's a misalignment, just open the lines of communication and ask questions. I think that's all.
Shabby, I'm going to flip roles on you for a minute. I'm going to take over.
Oh, no.
because we aren't hearing enough from Shabby. You just made me realize Shabby is enormously talented in this particular area of culture of philanthropy. And you've actually done a terrific job at our firm. And you know how important it is to me. And you and I have partnered on this, but you've been the one primarily executing. So communication, you just pointed out, is a really, really important factor. Where would what are the next 2 or 3 pieces that can actually have a meaningful impact in a relatively discrete period of time that will really make a difference?
Yeah, I think that, for leaders specifically, I think look to the people that you can deputize authority to, right? Like having power of authority comes either from your title or your position in an organization, and the people that are in those roles typically will rise to the occasion, we hope, right? But that doesn't mean that because you don't have a standard or traditional power of authority that you don't have influence on culture. And so for leaders, I would say look to those people who we deem as crucial to culture, meaning if they agree or get buy-in to what you're selling or what you're pitching or what you're trying to initiate, everyone else is going to buy in as well. So look to those people, lean heavily on them, and delegate and authorize some authority there. And then the other one is to be very clear about expectations. And this, I think, goes both ways. So it's up to the leader to set expectations for the rest of the organization of what they plan to do, what they want from their teams, what they will in turn serve and support their teams, how they're planning to do that. And then I think for the staffers to be able to also set expectations and we say this a lot at org group, you have to be able to push back and you have to be able to advocate for yourself. There's some element of that everywhere. You have to be able to set the expectation for your supervisor or for your team to say, this is what I can do in my capacity. This is what I'm capable of. This is what I'm driving towards. Are we headed in the same direction? So I think communication is a big one. Delegating and seeking out authority and delegating authority to others and looking for those people that are crucial to culture is another one. And then advocating clear in terms of what your capabilities are and what you can do is probably the third one. And those are all real drivers of culture and how people work together. It's a lot of psychology, I think.
Can I have actually ask one question just while we have a few minutes left? And Steve, it would be for you. I mean, you've lived through 2008. You went through the bubble in 2001. Maybe we're around in the Great Depression. I don't know how old you are now. But you've lived through this past 30 years in a few of these rocky situations. Do you have any insights or thoughts of what the next few years could look like? Any key takeaways that you think that if you look back to 2008 and there's one thing you remembered in the philanthropy space that we should be doing now, what would that be? And I'm just curious your thoughts.
Well, sort of at the 30,000 foot level, I would say I realized this crisis more than any other, that there is an enormous division between those who have been through these things like me, several crises, and those who are just experiencing it either for the first time or, sort of figuring it out, in the early part of their career. I mean, the fear factor right now is palpable. And it's warranted. I'm not saying it's not warranted, but for those of us who are a bit more calloused and, have been around and all that stuff, old, in other words, translation old, we've seen it before, honestly. And it's not that it's any less chaotic and so forth, but what we learn to do, honestly, and if we have a bit of entrepreneurial spirit, we start to say, when things change like this, there are opportunities. And we're talking a lot about that today, opportunities to change your organization, the board. You've asked me a couple of questions about the board. I mean, everyone looks at their board and says, we could do better. And there are those boards who are really weak. And this would be a moment truly where you ought to look at, your fellow board members and say, you know what, it's a moment we have to make a change right now because everything's changing and people are more accustomed to being confronted with, oh, so we need to change that too. And, all the development tactics. I mean, who would imagine that just 2 months ago, all the events that we were planning for the spring would be canceled? Well, guess what? We're all going to have to, be super creative and super entrepreneurial and do things that we never would have imagined. But maybe we should have done that anyway. Maybe events are way too many events. They're too expensive. They're all that stuff. A lot of advantages to them, but there are also a lot of problems. CJ, I've heard you say this 100 times too. So, it's a moment. That's what you learn when you go through these things time and time again is, and unfortunately there are too many of them, but, you learn that, wow, let's look for the silver lining. Let's try to be super optimistic, not foolishly optimistic, but optimistic about the potential of what we can achieve in a changing environment, if you get what I'm saying. That's my wisdom for you, CJ.
I like how you preface the not foolishly optimistic.
Right. I got
If you
that.
are an internal optimist, I'm a little more realistic.
Shabby, may I answer this question about, is it smart to have the board, initiate change with the founder issue, or have the founder do it?
Yeah, go for it.
I think as much as every founder thinks that their wisdom should live on forever and that they're going to be able to create the right scenario for the new person, I think I found through experience that doesn't work. And it's not just my own experience, but I see I've gone through a lot of founder changes. I think setting it up properly so that the new person can win is a really big deal. But then I think letting the board transition the new person in and give them leeway to create their own mark on the organization without changing it dramatically, because that's what usually people want to do, too quickly. Why don't you just learn about the good parts and the bad parts first, and figure out your staff. If I were to advise a new leader who took over from a founder, I would say you've got to be very sensitive to the staff. Staff likely have been around because of that founder, and they feel very dedicated to the thoughts of that person and all that stuff. So it's also just a wonderful time to let the board play a much bigger role. So I will stop there, but there are a lot of really good thoughts in that.
No, that's great. There's more room for one more question, which I'll turn over to Becca. And the question is, have you worked with organizations that have philanthropy KPIs for staff outside of development? So you were speaking earlier about the program team, marketing, all of the volunteers, et cetera. Do you have examples of that and what people might be able to track?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and to this person who's asked this question, it's not just necessarily your program team, but going back to how can we engage volunteers is also a really great area where you can implement some KPIs, ensure board activity, and also ensure success across the organization. So I think with your program team especially, you can use them to help with donor stewardship. So you can assign touch points that they need to be doing to reach out to top donors and just let them know what's happening. Your program team is the best suited to update them on what's happening with the mission. So you can certainly give everybody a portfolio, be it a fundraising portfolio or a stewardship portfolio, but everybody can certainly play a role in fundraising.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense. Steve, I want to close it out with you. I'd love for you to share your outlook, I think maybe over the next year in terms of predictions in the economy, cultures of philanthropy, donor behavior, what have you. Just what is your insight over the next year, 3 years?
Well, if I were to parrot our leader, I would say it's going to be tremendous. We're going to have but I'm only kidding. Look, the world has changed, no doubt about it. And there were those who predicted something as weird and chaotic as a virus. But I think much like security at airports, changed forever, this might very well just change the way we roll through life forever, because it's enormously dangerous. And by the way, we cannot afford to go through another one of these again. I'm talking about the world, not just the United States of America. But how will it change it for us? We've talked about a lot of the things, the virtual nature of it, the lack of personal connectivity and interaction, in person, although I don't think that will go on all that long. But I think it will, we will lean much more heavily on digital for sure. If you look at what's happening in the stock market, Amazon, Facebook, all the big tech companies are doing extremely well, regardless of what happens in the market day after day. Why? Because the world is continuing to shift in that direction. So for us, we should be aggressively adopting everything related to tech, everything related to efficiency and productivity. And I would see that it's pretty obvious. What I'm saying is not too dramatic, but make the changes now, use technology, take time right now to be thoughtful. I'm trying to think in every way I can right now about how to advance my own company and the nonprofit clients that I work with while I have time to think, because I think it's going to get really crazy, like in the fall, for example. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you. We are just about at time. Thank you to our amazing panelists for this conversation. We had a few tech hiccups, I think, at the beginning with my sound and Steve's computer, but I think we got back on track and finished strong, so all good. There were a couple people asking if we will share this information afterwards. We'll share a recording of this webinar on our website. And we'll also, like, all of our past webinars are also on our website. They're all uploaded and listed there, so please check them out if you haven't already. And we'll also be following this up with a survey, so please do let us know your thoughts. Your feedback helps us tremendously. And that's a wrap. I think we're all good. Thank you all. Thank you,
Shabby. Great job.
Thank you, Shabby.
Thanks all. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.